Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this Thursday evening with Exploring Ancestral Wisdom and Healing. This is Denise King Francisco, and I am joined by my two very dear friends, Nicole LaFanti Fix and David Cad Sturkin. Hey, you two.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Good to be here tonight, guys.
Everybody, the chat room is open. Hey, Linda Grizak, you've already hopped in there. Good to have you in our chat room tonight. Wherever you happen to be around Grandmother Earth, no matter what time it happens to be where you are, welcome to the show. And please do come on into the chat room. It's always a great place for discussion, ask your questions, share your wisdom, and to be with fellow seekers. So this evening on our program, we're going to be talking about children. And yesterday, as we do every month, we kind of have a brief conversation, the three of us, about, so what should we talk about tomorrow night? You know, where do we take this? And the question was asked by Cad, and all of a sudden the answers started pouring in, and it began with Nicole. Nicole, would you talk about with everybody what it is that you chose and why you chose to talk about it tonight?
Yeah, well, I've just been getting this pattern a lot and thinking about with my own daughter, who's 5, Sophia, but just how kids have so much to teach us if we just sit and listen, right? And so often we're trying to conform them to our standards, our needs, our facts. How do they fit into that? Without really sitting and watching and listening and learning from them, especially in the work that I do with kids, a lot of adolescents, where we're really, that's just a time in one's life where we're starting to separate from our parents and become individuals, but we still need our parents, and just seeing these kids who are really wanting and looking for love and acceptance from their parents, but then we, through our own, history, traumas, life stressors, can so often lose sight of who we are, right? So it's like they have so much to teach us in terms of, various things, but certainly love and joy and laughter and just our own lovability. So that's how it came to me.
I love that. And Cad, you added something onto that subject. And would you talk about why you felt like you wanted to choose this add-on and why?
Sure. So I think one of the things we kind of talked about as well was, do we start to see, can we start to see patterns in children that may demonstrate that they are trying to work through some of the ancestral either wounds, traumas that we kind of have seen running through our families, and how do we help them in a situation like that? The one thing that I brought up in our discussion was what happens when an adopted child is placed in a different family who doesn't share the blood and the bones of that particular family, and then starts to experience some of the trauma or wounds from their biological family, and sometimes the awkwardness that a family might experience in relationship to that, by going, what's going on with this kid, not maybe even recognizing that that may be some ancestral things that are coming forward for that child, and how do you help them work through that?
I love that. I love this topic. And I think what makes it even more wonderful is that, Cad, you're a pediatric nurse practitioner. You're also an adopted person. Nicole, you are a mother of a delightful 5-year-old named Sophia, and you are also a therapist. I'm an adopted person. And I think that we all have our own experiences of how the ancestors have perhaps moved through us and we didn't understand it because we are adopted, or how we're watching it in our children, and for me with my grandson Easton. It's a fantastic topic.
Sure.
So Nicole, one of the things that people will ask me often is, so do you think that my child is an old soul? Or somebody may make this statement, Cad, you probably hear this a lot at the hospital. I think that's a very old soul. How do you describe an old soul that's come back in a child's body, Nicole?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, there's just like a wisdom, right? That's far beyond their years. And, I just think of that depth in their eyes and just this understanding and acceptance and, I don't know, this, they allow us for so much grace. They allow others, I think, so much grace, right?
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. And Cad, you're right there in the pediatrics department at the hospital. And do you ever walk in and look at a baby and just know, oh, I think this is an old soul?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that Nicole said was the depth of their eyes. There's been times where I've walked in, walked in to see a child, and the parents are holding them, and they just look at me, and it feels like in many ways like they're seeing more than just me. They're seeing beyond my physical being. The other thing I think that I find very interesting as well is just there's times where kids will make statements, and I can't think of an example of what they've said, but they'll make a statement to you or to me that I just look at them and think, you are wise beyond your years. How did an old 2-year-old or a 3-year-old come up and, it could even be just a school-age child, but they have this knowing. I think that's really kind of how it feels to me. Like they've experienced it before, and sometimes they look at us as adults and just go, like, are you stupid? You should know what this. You should know the answer to this, but I've seen that
so easily to them.
Yeah, and I've seen that as well in children that are dying. There are some children that I cared for in my years as a pediatric oncology nurse, where it felt like to me that they had already experienced, that this was like second, third, fourth time around. They weren't frightened. They weren't, they were the things they were saying to their parents. It was just, amazing. And so, definitely, you run into those kids that are wise beyond their years.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that, and I find it fascinating that from what you're describing, these children were actually comforting their parents at the time of their passing.
Yeah.
And Nicole, I know for a fact that Sophia has come up with some real zingers.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. She points out, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Right? Like only a child can, because kids also mirror to us our strengths and our weaknesses, right?
Yes, they do. And when you add any ancestral patterning or ancestral relationship to their person, to their personality, to their experience, what they come in with, as I say, what they're born with in their DNA, in their ancestral memories, in their lifetimes of memories, can affect relationships for the rest of their lifetime. And I think about my daughter Elise, who at 2 years old educated me. She schooled me on reincarnation and informed me quite adeptly that last time around she was my mother. And I've watched this play out even as a 28-year-old woman, and I'm a 57-year-old woman. There are times when I watch her attempt to mother me. And it's always been that way. Then we can begin to see patterns already emerging. And, you know, do you find within your practice, Nicole, that there comes a time when parents or grandparents, aunties, uncles may begin to see patterns in a child's behavior that need explanation? Like, I don't know why they keep saying this. I don't know why they keep doing this. I don't know why they're enamored with the music of Chopin and they're only 4.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about how, observant a parent is to notice those things, right? But then to sit and listen to it, too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I get back to just thinking how there's so much we can learn from them, right? If we're willing to sit and listen.
Mm-hmm.
So, and not every parent is, but I think those of us, the 3 of us, and those of us listening tonight, I'm sure are more of the ones who are observers
Mm-hmm.
and are paying attention.
Right. And if the parents aren't paying attention, the grandparents certainly are.
Mm-hmm.
Right, Kelly
Yeah.
Spencer?
Yeah.
I know she pays attention.
One of the things I think that I saw recently, it was just it was something posted on Facebook that I thought was really interesting. So it showed it was an infant and a grandparent, and they were from an African tribe. One of the things, so the meme was about the fact that in this particular tribe, once a child was born, they spent the first several years of their life with their grandparents because the belief was that these children coming into the world had information to give to grandpa and grandma who were going to be moving out of the world. And the grandpa and grandma who had been in the world had wisdom to share with this infant that was coming into the world. And so the emphasis was on the fact that they spent a lot of time together because of the wisdom that they shared between each other.
I love that.
That's powerful. Like the knowledge of that, right?
Absolutely. And the remembrance and the keeping on of the tradition. It reminds me of Barbara Dullknife and Davian. It's the practice in some Lakota families that the grandparents raise the oldest grandchild.
Yeah. Well, and I think even going back to what we were talking about just a few minutes ago, one of the things I love about the Native American culture is that they do a naming ceremony after the child has been, and I'm not sure, Janice, you can probably speak to this, the age that this happens at, but they observe the child and they observe their gifts, and they're, the elders are watching them and determining kind of who they are, mm-hmm. and then they give them a name that represents them mm-hmm. as they are.
And oftentimes it's a name that's gifted from a relative who has already passed.
Sure.
To carry that on. Yeah. And sometimes the name is given based on a dream that's been given. With my own grandson, Easton, Del Marie, my elder sister Del Marie had a dream. And in the dream, she was told that Easton's name is Wichapkigli Hokshila. He returns to us from the stars.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
he will have a formal naming ceremony at one point, but the name is given, and just as you said, based on the gift or the talent or the reason that the child has returned, or in his case, that he's returned from the stars. And so I will understand that Easton will always have a proclivity toward probably stargazing, an interest in the cosmos and things of that nature that
Yeah.
already lend uh, to his antiquity. And I was alluding before about grandparents, because when we grandparents sit around, me and Kelly, we can take a look at our three grandchildren and we can begin to see patterning because of our age that our kids, the child's parents wouldn't necessarily pick up on, but because of our age, we can be
Yes.
more observant of those things and
Yep.
point them out or not, but at least pay attention.
Yep. Yep. I think one of the things too that we talked a little bit about yesterday, before, as we were thinking about the show, is how quickly and how easily, once a child is born, that they can quickly become layered with our stuff.
Yes.
And how do you really be aware of that, and awareness and such that we allow them to develop who they are, develop their gifts, and I think it's again giving them some gentle instruction, giving them some gentle nudging, but we quickly layer our beliefs, our values, our
Expectations.
on a child, and very quickly they become a mini me, versus allowing them to really be who they are, and as you said, maybe bringing that ancestral wisdom with them, and developing in their gifts. Yeah.
And I love this discussion, and because we're talking about the gifts and the talents that a child brings with them, and some of it is unique to them, of course. Some of it is in their blood and in their bones. But oftentimes people will say to me, well, I hope that this child doesn't grow up to be like their father or their grandfather or their great grandfather who was a schmuck. When somebody says to me, I hope that my toddler, my 2-year-old, fill in the blank the name, doesn't grow up to be an alcoholic like granddad and grandma. Nicole, how do you respond to that? Because certainly you must hear it, at least in regular conversation.
Yes, I do. And, I think trying to hold space for, like, the reason why someone might say that, right? Like, you're trying to be protective, because you care so much, right? But I wonder how that might affect this child, hearing that, because that is someone that is part of him, right? Or her. So, trying to connect that, like if someone were to call my father or grandfather, a schmuck, I'm automatically going to make that part of who I am too, right?
Exactly.
So that trauma easily is passed down out of a parent or grandparent or a loved one who's trying so desperately to be protective, right? And to not make it happen. So it ends up being kind of this self-fulfilling.
Words are powerful and thoughts are powerful. It's like Hank Williams Jr., the old family tradition. And I think that perhaps, without sticking our head in the sand, focusing on the child's innate gifts and talents, while not ignoring some of the other things is pretty important. And I think that the three of us can agree that right now we've got some children that are coming into this world with some pretty spectacular gifts and talents, and many extraordinary talents. How do you feel about that, Cad?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think one of the challenges though that we have right now is that um, people, and I'll put myself in that category as one people. Um, we can be very distracted by what's around us in such a way that we maybe aren't paying attention. And you think about the distraction now that kids have with electronics, and how do you it's that balance. We know that we live in a world where it's very electronically driven.
Mm-hmm.
How do you help a child recognize that there's a place for that, but also as well try and blossom and develop the gifts that hopefully, because we're not distracted, are seeing in them. How do we, so yeah, I think personally, I think it's just children. I see a lot of parents when I'm at the hospital so distracted by their phones or so distracted by their computers that the child may be sitting in the bed and they're not really even paying attention to them. And so, I think as adults we need to really be careful or conscious of that. I think I posted a meme that said recently that said, "We are the new ancestors, so act accordingly."
I love that.
We're these children's grandpas and grandmas and aunts and uncles, and we need to realize what I'm doing is going to affect 7 generations behind me, and I need to be thinking about 7 generations ahead of me. So I think for me, it's really about bringing and building a consciousness of how I interact with children, how I interact with young people, because I think one of the things that can happen as we grow older is we just these kids, they just don't know, or things like that, and rather taking an opinion of how can I help them,
Mm-hmm.
how can I walk alongside them as they're going through this.
Mm-hmm. I like that. And in the chat room is really getting full. Del Marie and Tracy Civic, Lily, Kelly Spencer, Linda Griezak, a perfect example of what we're talking about. Lindy, you've been a school teacher for 40 years. And if you would type into the chat room what you've noticed, the difference in the young people that you taught just last year and the kids that you taught 40 years ago, is there a profound difference? And what is that difference? Are they more spiritually open? Are they more sensitive, empathic? If you would share that from your perspective as a school teacher, a longtime school teacher, that would be outstanding. Nicole, would you address what Kat just said about parents being distracted by technology and the need that a child coming into this physical world needs for one-on-one attention? Because
Yes.
I think it's pretty necessary.
Yes, and it's hard because these phones are they're addictive. Every time you get a text message, every time you get an email, it delivers like this ping of dopamine to our brains. So they truly are addictive. But then we live in this world too where, everyone's kind of addicted to these technology, and so we're not really emotionally present, right? So like I've been saying a lot lately, I am ready to get a landline and like toss the cell phone in the river. Like bring it back, the landline. Because I'm guilty of it too. It's like I have to be so conscious of like putting it on airplane mode and setting it aside, or because there's so much to happens through it. But yeah, these kids, they know, and they're witnessing, they're observing. And I remember when Sophia was just a baby, and I caught her looking at me and like wanting to connect with me through our eyes, and which that's like one of the bases for attachment. And how I realized in that moment, like it's not the child who has a hard time attaching to the parent. Mm-hmm. It's the parent that has the hard time attaching to the child, right? So just in this context, it's like, it's us that needs to change, really, right? It's not.
That's so a great point.
These kids, yes, like they're constant, and working with these kids, especially when they're in crisis, they just still want they just want their parents' attention
mm-hmm.
and love, and some parents have such a hard time even finding things that their kids are doing well, and it's like, we're missing the mark, right?
Yeah. The other piece I think of this as well is we as families are not as connected as we used to be. We live in different cities. We're very busy with our lives. But I think about experiences that in my own family. So my father is 93 years old, and I'm going to tell on my family. But there are sometimes the great grandchildren go, I don't want to go spend time with the old people.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, so how do you develop that bond so that there isn't this huge, gap between the kids, the grandpa and grandma? I mean, I remember loving to go and spend time at my grandpa and grandma's house. The fact that they
mm-hmm.
had really cool stuff. I always thought, but it seems, and Nicole, maybe you can speak to this. One of the things that I've observed is it seems like that as we have become more driven by electronics, our ability to form those relationships, and maybe we talked about this before, is difficult because we believe that having a friend on Facebook who maybe we've never met is a relationship versus really developing those family ties and helping the young ones recognize the value of the older ones, and the older ones, again, recognizing the value of the younger ones.
That's a great point, Kat.
Yeah, it is, and I'm just thinking about how we are all like so longing for community and connection, right? But the only place that we've been able to find it in many ways is electronically, and how to bring it back to like this root, this deeper rooted connection in the family, mm-hmm. or in this one-on-one contact that some kids or adults can't do because of social anxiety, or because we're not learning some of these social skills that are really necessary in person to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And in that way, I think we can lose touch, I'll put it that way, with really observing our children and our grandchildren. And Linda is weighing in on the subject with regard to her son, Ben, who is a Green Beret. And she's saying, from a young age, my son Ben was always interested in playing with Army figures, or later playing Army. I have been researching my ancestry and amazed to see the number of important military people in the lineage. Looking for links in my other children. This is exciting stuff.
Yeah. Yep. Interesting.
So watching the patterns really can, I believe, lead us to understand what's already innate in our children that's being brought over from our ancestors, that's carrying on. And one of those gifts, I think, Dane was also very military. His bedroom always looked like a military museum, even as a kid. Everything was very neat, very orderly, and it was full of artifacts, military artifacts, which led me to believe at the very onset, after Elise introduced me to reincarnation, that my son probably had spent a few lifetimes in the military. And later he would have past life dreams and recollections where he could recall in great detail being in battle, to the degree that even Dr. Bob Huttinga took him on a past life regression. And Dane had recounted a lifetime where he had gone a Viking. And we can see that even perhaps adult patterns showing up in children, maybe as aggressive behavior or artistic behavior, flamboyant behavior. There are all sorts of behaviors, and we think, oh, who acted just like that? Uncle John acted just like that, and he's back, right? We see that patterning. And so how do we draw distinguish, I should say, between allowing the pattern of a gift for music or spirituality to unfold, or where do we come to understand that perhaps this child is here to break the pattern of uncontrolled anger? That's kind of a sticky wicket.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was going to ask too, and maybe Nicole has some insight in relationship to that. Is as you were talking about families saying, "Well, I hope they don't turn out like Uncle so and so," or this person in the family or that person in the family. How, as Denise said, how do we know that that behavior maybe showing up in them might be what is needed to heal the family line?
Exactly. When a child's rage, we'll say, or anger, there's outbursts, maybe more indicative of anger mom's never expressed over something else, right? Or it's coming back through, where they can mirror things to us that need to be processed and healed.
Yeah.
And like going off of, even if, Uncle John's the schmuck or whatever, it's like he also has good traits, right? So like remembering both. I mean, we've talked about before just the paradox, and I've been really big into that, like this room for both, like it's not all or nothing. So like the tension, holding the tension of the paradox, which can be so confusing because as our brains just want to go to, it's either all or nothing, like he's either all a jerk or not. So I'm thinking how we can hold space for, this child is having, these anger outbursts or whatever, but is also, there's something that's trying to come out in that and has really wonderful traits too, right?
Exactly. And perhaps it's also the wake-up call for the grandparent or the parent to do their own work. Because I happen to be a firm believer that when we do our own personal work and healing, as Kat said earlier, we are also affecting change on both sides of the generational timeline.
Right.
Yeah.
If nothing else, when a child sees us trying to get our act together, trying to change, to do better, there's a pattern set that we can do better and we can strive to do better. I think that's at the very least, but I do believe that at the core of things, when we're doing our work, just by virtue of our genetics, and as Amantha Murphy says, the weave, the ties that bind, we're able to affect change in the subtle bodies. How do you feel about
Yeah.
that?
I believe that wholeheartedly, and I'm even thinking about how so often, like, we screw up as parents, right? We either feel so guilty or so ashamed for our own reasons that we don't talk about it. And shame really grows in secrecy. So not talking about it becomes in and of itself can be the trauma. It's like you got to talk about it. So if we can get through our own discomfort with the fact that we messed up, which we all do as parents, then it's coming back around and talking about it. Like, hey, Sophia, I yelled pretty hard this morning. What was that like for you? Let's talk about it, and talking about why I did it, or what it was like for her, and just having that space to process through it and what that can allow through healing of the relationship, through ourselves, through them, but then the generations behind, and
Mm-hmm.
and forward.
Mm-hmm. Getting it out in the open.
One of the things that you said, which I think I'll just say personally, I observe is this almost this obsession with perfection. So that we can't admit that we make mistakes, and for a parent to say to a child, you know what, I really messed up, and I'm sorry. That's a very humbling thing for a parent to do. And so, as you said, I think what ends up happening is, yes, we process that in our head, but we don't ever address it with the child. And so, as you said, that just continues to get perpetuated from kind of one, and I think from one generation to the next. It just,
The family secret.
Yeah, we carry that trauma, we carry the secret, we carry the anger. Exactly.
Depression, sadness, loss.
Yep.
And I think, conversely to that, I think, some of us are here to break patterns, but I think that some of us are also here to resurrect them. And the reason that I say that is, this past weekend, Kelly and Lily were sitting at the dining room table here in my house, and you two saw the photo. Ancestry.com sends me this link. It looks like we found one of your grandmothers from 1643. And here is a court rendering, a drawing from 1643 in Connecticut of who appears to be, I haven't looked into it too much, my grandmother who was on trial for witchcraft. And sadly, and interestingly, her name was Mary Elizabeth. My daughter's name is Elise Marie, and my son's name is Dane Andrew. Her last name was Andrews. Was convicted of witchcraft, and she was hung by the neck until she was dead in Norwich, Connecticut in 1640 something or other. And I wondered to myself as we were all, looking at this court rendering of my grandmother, as you said, Cad, looked like she was, pointing her finger and oh, goodness, raising a ruckus there in the courtroom.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, well, how many of my grandmothers and other women in my family felt the sting of persecution to the degree that they never allowed for their spiritual gifts? And perhaps, just perhaps, I'm one of the women in the bloodline that's come here to resurrect that gift, to bring it back to the earth plane as it was and has been in that bloodline of mine.
Right.
So sometimes I think we can not only look that maybe we need to break a pattern, but by golly, maybe we're here to bring something back, a gift and a talent that for whatever reason went away a long, long time ago. How do you feel about that?
I'm
I mean,
just,
go ahead, Nicole.
I'm just thinking of how healing that is, right? Like for the lineage of the ancestry, like how healing for, you know, someone to come back and bring life back to, you know, the spiritual gifts, being a mystic, and like being able to do it openly, right? And without, I mean, there is persecution certainly still attached to it, um, but not like it was then, right? So to being able to be free and being, you know, authentically who you are.
Exactly. And
so
I
healing.
I think of right now the movement in Native America of the Two-Spirit talking circles and the resurgence of Two-Spirit conversation about that and the beauty of being a Two-Spirit person. All of a sudden it's back, it's being brought back up to the surface and being expressed in a time that allows for it right now. I find it exciting.
I think often of how many people that, you know, would identify as like a light worker that's here now. Like, I feel like there's so much here now for healing that has been persecuted previously, right? That's now coming up for healing to be free and just being, you know, spiritually minded or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, like there's so much healing that's coming up to the surface now, but for that freedom of being allowed to just being who you are.
Right, the freedom of expression.
Having to hide it. Yeah.
Exactly, being proud to be Irish, being proud to be Polish, being proud to be whatever. Del Marie, our wonderful Del Marie, is chiming in. Hey, Lady Hawk, it's good to have you in the chat room. Glad you could make it. Del is saying sometimes a child resembles so much of a loved one who passed and may have a birthmark like someone who has passed. In the Lakota belief, when this happens, the child is watched closely for personal traits of the loved one who passed. Now, have you ever had that experience, Chuy? Oftentimes we will say, gee, they have grandpa's eyes. Or grandma's flaming red hair. Now, as an adopted person, and Cad, you know how this is, we can look around and we can see our relatives who are blood related and we can see the resemblances. And maybe we see that everybody in a particular family, that they're all really great athletes and maybe we're not, or maybe they're not and we are. And we can see the differences. It's very hard to find a congruency. And let alone to share a birthmark or to say, gee, you have grandma's eyes or you have grandma's chin or something of that nature, let alone a spiritual gift and talent. Did you ever think about that growing up?
Yeah, you know, it was always interesting because I always felt like how do I describe this? Well, I always felt a little bit. Well, I felt different than than my brothers and sisters. Even though I was loved, you know, I was loved by my parents just the same way they were. They always felt to me like I was different. And different. I'm not sure how to describe it other than I felt like I tended to be more expressive with my emotions, and that sometimes was uncomfortable in my family unit. And so one of the things that I realized that I did as a result of that, because it became clear to me as a child that was a little bit uncomfortable, was I learned to not be as expressive.
And it went against your nature.
Yeah. And no fault of anyone in my particular, you know, family unit.
Right.
Because they grew up in, you know, with families that express things differently. It just when you are maybe when you're not part of a family, when you're not part of a blood family structure, and then put into one that isn't, it just sometimes you can see the differences, and not that those differences are necessarily again wrong. It's just sometimes they become a little more clear, and sometimes that causes a little stress and anxiety, I think, in the family.
I would agree with that. I think that it's our human nature to want to look out and see people who look like us, or that feel like us, or think like us, and perhaps share maybe a same talent or propensity as we do. And we can be left to our own devices when we are an adopted person, and we're wondering, well, why do I think this way? How come I see ghosts and nobody else in this whole family sees ghosts? Right? Why is that? What's going on here? Doesn't everybody do that? Yeah.
Well, it is interesting to me that so I had an aunt that I was in my adopted family that I was very close to. My aunt June, and she was a nurse. She was an LPN. And one of the things was that she observed me. And, I was getting ready to graduate from college with a psychology degree. And I remember sitting down with her one time at the dinner table on a Sunday and saying, I just don't know what I'm going to do when I get out of school. That's when she said to me, I think you'd make a good nurse. And I was like, no way. I hate blood and I hate but yeah, she saw that in me and I didn't see that in myself. And she said, well, why don't you just try it? And so then I started working at a nursing home and, absolutely fell in love with it. She saw that in me. I didn't see that myself. And I thought that was, it was incredible because that was not even anything I would have even moved towards. So again, I think that's kind of, again, our elders observing us. And this was late into my life, graduating from college. But I'm glad that I took the step that I did.
Thanks for sharing that.
That's a great point. Just thinking about how other people sometimes see something that we're either in denial about or don't recognize, right? And how nice it is that she pointed it out to you too.
Yeah.
Del Marie is sharing. When I was born with teeth, and was told I looked like a sister of my father's. I was told I had some of her traits, and was told that I would be outspoken like her. Well, I guess they jinxed me. I'm outspoken. That's what we love about you, Del. Oh, goodness.
So one of the things that I'm wondering about, and maybe Nicole will have some thoughts about this. One of the things that I experienced growing up that was not anything that was not something that was common in my family was depression. Depression to the point where I considered suicide several times throughout my junior high and high school years. So one of the things I wonder about as we're having this discussion is could that have been the result of me not feeling like I could express who I truly was, or is that an ancestral pattern that I was carrying? I do know from my biological family that depression is something that runs in the family. But there's also part of me that wonders if because of who I knew I was. And sometimes the discomfort in my family for me expressing the way that I was just kind of suppressed who I was. And was that the reason I was?
Yeah, I mean, I think our genes kind of lay like this, like the light switch, right? Like, and then our environment can turn it on or off in some ways, you know. And I think, you know, it can be so multifactorial. But I know that we are hardwired to feel like we belong. And so when we don't feel like we belong or we don't fit in or that, you know, who we are is different, like, you know, we can develop these core beliefs like something's wrong with me, that really set the groundwork, you know, in our minds for how, for depressive symptoms, you know. Suicidality is such a symptom of depression. So, and when you feel like you don't fit in, you don't belong, you know, you want to, it's so awful that you would rather die than live that way, right? So.
Interesting.
It seems to me that our ancestral memories are so deep, and we carry so much of the stardust of our ancestors that depression, melancholy, can just be part of the patterning of trauma, PTSD, depending on where our ancestors came from, what their experiences were. And sometimes when children are really young, they will do things that are so surprising. I remember when Dane was 4 years old, I just heard him crying in his bedroom, and he was just sobbing in his bedroom. And I walked in, and here he is with his little tape recorder, and he's listening to Gordon Lightfoot sing The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And you would have thought that he was at a wake of some sort. And I said to him, Dane, why do you keep listening to Mom's tape about the Edmund Fitzgerald? And he said, Mom, I feel so bad for those men. He's 4. I feel so bad for those men. And I said, do you think that you knew those men, Dane? He said, you know, somehow I think that I did, Mama. And that very next summer, we took him up to Whitefish Point, which is where the Edmund Fitzgerald went down, and it's where the Edmund Fitzgerald Museum, Shipwreck Museum is. And I watched a 5-year-old boy look at the pieces and the parts of the Edmund Fitzgerald that had been pulled up from the Great Lake they call Gitche Gumee, as if he knew all of the pieces and parts himself, as though he were one of the shipbuilders. And I just watched. And to this day, if you ask him what is his favorite song, he will tell you The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. But when we see children having these experiences, rather than to poo-poo the emotion around it or what have you, we began talking earlier about, you know, Dane, why are you crying, honey? Why do you keep listening to this tape over and over and over again? And why at 5 years old, when most kids want to go to Disney World, do you want to go to Whitefish Point? It's observing. And I think that when we observe the little ones, whether we're an adoptive parent or whether we're the biological parent, and rather than to just say, oh, they just have a thing for, to really take a look at. So is there a history of shipbuilding? Well, and as it turns out, in Dane's father's family, there is a history of sailing the Great Lakes. It's fascinating what we remember either from a previous incarnation or the remnants of an ancestor's memories in our blood and bones.
Yeah. Well, Denise, you and I, we've talked about this before, the fact that the Irish people were brought to the Americas as slaves. And I remember one of the things that Amantha shared with us, and she got very tearful about this, when she was sharing this with us, that when the people from Ireland were brought to the Americas, or were coming here, believing that they were going to be, indentured servants, that one of the things that they did was they put dirt from Ireland in their pockets,
Yes.
because of the great sorrow that they were having, realizing that they were never going to be coming back.
Yes.
And so there's part of me that sometimes wonders whether, for me personally, some of that kind of melancholy and some of that depression is part of my bones and my blood because of being Irish. Am I still feeling some of that from my ancestors? Is that something that I've carried with me? And it is just part of who I am.
Yes. Well, I was there when you were in the Stone Circle, my friend, there in Ireland, and the way that you were so moved.
Yeah.
And I felt as though you weren't there alone. You were there with all of your ancestors who were so happy that you had come back to Ireland. And you were standing on the soil, the dirt of your people.
Yeah.
Well, and the fact that you're even bringing it up and that's resonating with you and you're questioning that, to me just says, you have some of that answer that you're looking for, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I know that when Elise was little, she wanted to go to, of all places, what little kid wants to go to the island of Santorini? And, when she was 6 years old, she started talking about, when I'm a big girl, can you take me to Santorini? And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, what have I got going on here in this household? Only to find out that, my people are from Sardinia and Santorini and Africa in the beginning of my bloodline. And the fact that in the year 1992, I would give birth to a child who would remember that is absolutely spectacular to me. I'm curious, Nicole, do you see any ancestral patterning with Sophia or any moments that have raised your eyebrow?
Like if she reminds me of someone in my family?
Yeah.
Well, she'll do things like where I see a little bit of Dave's lineage and mine too, which is really cool to see. Like she, through a series of events, but for COVID being happening, like she ended up in Catholic school. She would not have gone. Like we would not have put her in Catholic school, but for these series of events, which and I'm grateful that we do. But Dave comes from a long lineage of it. I'm sure it's down the line in mine too. But and she, as she's in her little Catholic school uniform, like she takes it very seriously too. And we'll say and Dave's mom passed away 2 years ago, and she went to Catholic school as a little girl, and we're like, all right, Phyllis, what have you been up to? We're waiting up there. Because, today getting her dressed, it's like, it could be 1955, right?
I love that.
Yes. So, yeah, things like that. But then she also loves to collect, the rocks and the stones and dirt and feathers. And I think I shared with you both how when she said that heaven's a place that lives in your heart.
Right.
I think that heaven's a place that lives in your heart. And I was like, wow, that is so profound and true. And then I think it was in the feather too.
Right.
And I was like, yeah. So things like that just make you think, yeah, who are you?
Right. And to Lady Hawks, she's saying that she wants to investigate further a relationship that she has with an ancestor because they share the same birthday. Looking at the coincidences, the synchronicities, I think is so important. just after Easton was born, Elise sent a photo to me. She was goofing around with him. And she said, "Doesn't he look like George Washington?" And she sent this photo of this poor kid. She had put this hat or something on his head, and he looked like George Washington. But the irony of that, yeah, was 15 minutes before that, the good folks at Ancestry.com sent me a note saying, "You're related to George Washington."
Oh.
And I said to Todd, "Look at this photo." And he said, "Well, wouldn't you know, you just got a note from the folks at Ancestry that George is one of your relatives."
Yeah, here he is. He's come back.
Right. Yeah. Lord, heaven help us all. So, but how fascinating when we look at the coincidences of what does come out of the mouth of babes is pretty priceless. And to follow that thread of thought, to look at the names that they chose, or perhaps we gave them a name and later on the child says, "I really don't want to be called by that. I would rather be called." And to follow that thread of thought, to allow their innate gifts and talents to blossom. And if we do see that, oh Lord, they are carrying on a family tradition that maybe needs to not be carried on, where do we as parents and grandparents fit into that place of maybe it's time for us to take a look at how we may be still carrying it on?
Yes.
How do you feel about that, Nicole?
Well, I'm thinking of all of these kids that I've been working with who are transgendered, who identify right as different genders and want to be called by a different name. And then I'm wondering, like, what's happening? Like, I think people, being identifying as different genders, or as gay or lesbian or whatever for generations, right? Upon generations have probably, I'm sure, been suppressing that and having to do it in hiding. And now we're at a time where people are being so much more open about it and accepting, combined with, we know from research that calling a child by their chosen name, particularly in this minority group, the LGBTQ community, how important it is to do that, particularly from like a suicidality standpoint. So like the importance, right, of this acceptance of who you are, but things that may have been suppressed now coming out, and then the acceptance of. So
Exciting times with all of that.
Yeah.
The allowance and the investigative work and looking into things. And when I reconnected with my biological family, and really, Cad, you were the one that inspired me to pursue that, because I watched you go through the experience of finding your biological family, because there was a little bit of trepidation for me in that. But, to find out that, in the bloodline, the warriors go back all the way to Glencoe in Scotland, and of course here in Native America, but in Vietnam and the Revolution and Confederate soldiers and all of this. And I remember my son Dane looking at me and saying, "Now, Mom, I understand more who I am and why I have always been drawn to the South," whether it's Southern rock music, the accent, the heat, all of it in the South, Dane has always been drawn to, and to study the Civil War. And he said, "Now I understand, because it's my grandparents in my bones." And I said, that's a really great way to put it. It is your grandparents in your bones. And for those of you that are listening and you're wondering about your ancestry coming here to the Americas, Laura Smith turned me on to a great series. It's called Bark Skins. It's all one word, Bark Skins. And it's about about New France, which is what North America and parts of Canada was at one time called. And we see it's based on a novel, but there's so much historical truth. We see our ancestors from the UK territories especially, and France, coming over and meeting with the Iroquois and the Mi'kmaq and all of those amazing tribes, and how all of a sudden there's a metamorphosis and the becoming of a new generation. But it does, Cad, speak to the immigrants coming from what we now call the UK in cages
Yeah.
as indentured servants. That's such a polite way of putting it. In cages, and so that subject is dealt with. And again, it's called Bark Skins, and it's based on a novel. And Todd and I watched it in very short order. It was very fascinating.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah. Well, with that, the two of you, we are well past our top of the hour. Last thoughts, Nicole, on this subject of children and how their ancestors display through them?
Yeah, it's just making me really want to connect and observe with Sophia more. And so I guess I'm just thinking about how we have so much to learn through these kiddos, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And Cad, what, from your perspective, Cad, as an adopted person, what advice would you give adoptive parents in allowing their adoptive children to express who they are innately rather than perhaps try to help them mold or fit in to what has always been in their bloodline?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it just goes to the whole aspect of a parent in general, whether it's an adopted a child or a biological child. It just really observe them, allow them to be who they are. Gently give them instruction, but allow them to not. We don't have to create more mini me's. It's more about letting the child express who they are. Yeah.
I love that. And if they want to find out later, allow them to do 23andMe or Ancestry.com. Encourage it. So at the very least, they know where their people's land was at one time. And for my part of it, I would say to all of you, grandmas and grandpas and aunties and uncles and moms and dads, pay attention when your children looks at a photo of somebody that has long been passed and they know that person. They can identify the person in that old photo. Or when they wake up from a dream and they tell you about a time when they lived before, or a house they used to live in, or the way they used to look, or when they were a boy, or when they were a girl, or when they were your mom. To not just perhaps poo-poo that, because children, by nature of who they are, do challenge our balance. And so to allow yourself the beauty of perhaps taking a look into ancestry and past lives and why it is our children have an affinity for one thing or another. And yeah, my little Easton, that little boy, I walked in today and he was so happy to see me. And sometimes I just sit and I talk to him about Egypt. And as an adult, I talk to him, not all the time, but a lot of the time as though he's an adult, because I want to talk to that old part of him that recognizes that he's an old soul as well. Because they're all here to change the world. And I'd like to end the show, if I could, with what Linda Grizak is sharing. Now, Linda has been a teacher for over 4 decades. And many of her students were the students that were not in regular high school. Here's what she has to say. Students were my teachers in many ways. Many of the students I had the privilege of working with for over 40 years were at risk and had difficulty conforming to the expectations of others. They would oftentimes support their behavior by pointing to the hypocrisy of the religious establishment over the years. Over the years, I noticed they became more relaxed, vocal, and confident in their beliefs. I believed in some way they were the changers at the time. Now they may seem to be reflecting the attitude of today's world. And I think, thank you for sharing that, Linda. Our children are here to help change the world, and the best way for them to do it is to be exactly who they came here to be, and the healthiest version of that. And that's something that we as their elders can help them with by becoming the healthiest version of us. With that, everybody, thank you for joining us tonight. And if your inner child is wishing to have a dialogue with you tonight about some ancestral things, let that inner child dialogue. And if you want to have professional dialogue, you know how to get a hold of Nicole Fix. If not, give her a shout on Facebook and she'll let you know how you can address some of these things within yourself in a good way. Blessings be, everybody. Have a beautiful night. Thank you, Kat. Thank you, Nicole.
Night.
Thank you, Dana. Good night, everyone.